Welcome to the Superintendent's Hangout, where we discuss topics in education, charter schools, life in general, and not necessarily in that order. I'm your host, Dr. Sharetta. Come on in and hang out. In episode 10, I sat down for a hangout with Delano Jones. Delano has a long career in supporting public education and charter schools, and is currently an entrepreneur, and his company provides back office accounting and other support to charter schools across the state of California. We recorded this episode on an outdoor patio because it was the best location we could find given the circumstances, and so you will hear birds chirping and traffic going by, and I believe even some sirens, but it is certainly authentic. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed making it. Welcome, Delano. Thank you for coming and hanging out for a little bit here at the CCSA conference. If folks hear background noise, it's because we're recording out on a patio, and you'll probably hear birds and chairs scraping, but this is authentic. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, David. Glad to be here.
I wanted to start out, Delano, with you sharing a bit about your origin story. Where do you come from? What brings you to the present moment in your life and in your work?
That's a good question. I grew up in Los Angeles. My parents are Jamaican, so I have I like to, have that as the kind of in the forefront all the time. That culture. I grew up in Los Angeles, went to school there, was educated there, went to college in Long Beach State, met my wife at Long Beach. After college, we got married, we moved back to San Diego, and it was around that time that, I started, I shouldn't say career hunting, but it's more, looking for my space. And as a young man in my 20s at that time, you're still finding yourself to a large degree. And so I took a job in healthcare. Most people don't know this about me, but I started off in healthcare. And from there, I transitioned around a little bit. And then my father-in-law worked at the County Office of Ed down here in San Diego. He worked there over 30 years, retired from there. And one day he said, hey, they're hiring for some positions just kind of like right in your field and, fringe benefits and things like that. And so I got a job there, and about 2 years in, charter schools at that time were just coming on the radar. So this is roughly about early 2000,
okay,
right around that time frame. And the county office had a brand new charter schools unit. And at that time, they had one person that was in that role, and then I transitioned over there and sort of became the support to the lead. And that's what led me literally, organically down this road. I pride myself on the fact that I sort of grew up in the movement. And, I've been in many spaces with the movement. I've seen the movement ebb and flow, things like that. But my origin with charters came through the County Office of Ed. And I wear that as a badge of honor to a degree, because it really shaped me into who I am today and in the roles that I play within the charter school movement.
It's an interesting reflection point because, some of the listeners will know and some won't know, but charter schools are authorized by a number of different entities. In order to exist, we have to be authorized. Most of us are authorized by our local school district. Some are authorized by the county.
Yes.
And for a while, some were authorized by the state board, although that's been sunsetting.
Yes.
And so talk to us about the interaction, the interplay between your role at the county in the charter school division and how that interacted with district authorizers, and then perhaps charter school operators at the grassroots level.
It's funny you mention that, because even now, as I look back on that time and seeing how much I didn't know back then, right? One of the beauty about the county office is that it sort of plays the middleman role, right? If I were to sort of give it a critique, I would say it never really gets its hands dirty in anything. The county has this unique role that it plays in terms of servicing districts, right? And now to a large degree some charter schools, and I think they have seen over the years that there is a space for that type of service to charter schools. But during those early stages, there was a lot that we didn't know, right? The rules were extremely flexible. In fact, a lot of the times there were no rules around certain things. Does this apply to charter schools? Does that apply to charter schools? And there really wasn't a clear-cut answer, so you just sort of went with your best guess judgment at the time. During that time, we were just basically the middleman. We would collect, we would review, and pass through, right? The county at that time had one, maybe two charter schools under its authority, so there wasn't a lot of the what I would consider the legwork or the heavy lifting at that point in time. But more or less, we would review audits, we would review reports and things like that came from district schools, charter schools, and it was our role to review them and then pass them on to the state or file them, for lack of. And then again, during that time, it wasn't the amount of oversight that we see now, right? So it was very hands-off-ish, and I think as we went along over I would say the last 15 years or so, you can see clearly now where charters are boxed in with the oversight at all levels, not just at the authorized level, but also at the county level as well. So it was a unique place to be at that time, because again, looking back on it now, we were literally pioneers in some ways, if I were to sort of put it in that context.
Thank you for that historical perspective. Could you talk a little bit about your transition and journey from the public realm, County Office of Education, and then you went into the private sector with back office financial support agencies, and then bring you up to the present moment?
Yes. So while I was at the county, I interacted with quite a few individuals, both charter schools and back office providers and things like that. And I went to work for a back office provider for 10 years, 11 actually to be exact. Prior to that, I had stepped away from the county and worked at a charter school for a year. And then from there went into private industry. Same line of work, doing back office work. And I spent 10, 11 years there, really learning a lot, honing my skills, sharpening myself. And I think there was a natural progression over time to want to do this in a different way. I say in a different way. I tend to speak with passion and I work with passion. And, I can say with some amount of certainty that during those 11 years there, I developed a knack for what I was doing. I loved it. And I thought that I could be better. And so I made a decision in 2019 to step away from, the big box stores, so to speak, and sort of, branch out on my own. During that time, it was right before COVID, so 2019, circling forward into 2020 when COVID hit, and if I had it to do all over again, I wouldn't change a thing, because I think that I was right. I proved myself right in the fact that I knew that I could offer services and do the great things that all back office providers do, but not without, the layers that comes with being in a larger company.
It's instructive maybe for listeners to understand that, and I don't think this was an intended part of the charter school sector or movement 30 plus years ago, but many charter schools, due to their size, small size, cannot match as Delano refers to, the back office services of, for example, school district.
Yes.
Many charters start with just 100 kids or 200 kids and 10 staff members and perhaps no accounting experience and perhaps no payroll experience, et cetera. So there's been a real surge of private companies that some of them are private for-profit, some are non-profit, but that meet those needs kind of as almost on a cafeteria plan basis, where you can choose which services your organization needs. So when Delano refers to back office, that's what that is. So what's been the biggest pleasure and also the biggest challenge of striking out on your own?
I'm glad you asked. That's a great question. There are so many nuances to doing this, and as I look back, and I will sort of go back 5 years before I made this decision, right? Because my journey to that decision took 5 years, and by that I mean that I had this idea in my head, and I would play that scenario out year over year about what I could do differently. Because I look at the charter landscape, and and thank you for that clarity on back office. All back offices, companies, they're similar in many ways, but they're quite different in their own unique ways, right? And it's kind of like a pair of shoes. You may try on several pairs, but there's a pair that fits you perfectly, right? And so you sort of go with that company because they're mission aligned with you, things like that. They're knowledgeable, they know the arena, they know the space, they have relationships, things like that. So 5 years before I made that decision, I had been building towards it. But there's a certain amount of fear that comes with, stepping out on the cliff without a parachute or a harness to hold you back, that kept me from going forward. I would always find a reason not to. But after a time, I would, we all do this self-assessment and sort of look at our lives at certain space and time and go, hey, am I where I want to be? Did I accomplish my goals for this year? And I don't know about you, but, I don't necessarily call them goals or things that are heavy that I have to get done, but I have some checkpoints along the way in my life or in the year that I say, hey, if I do this thing, then that will make me a better person. If I work on these things over the course of the year, and I'm, success and failure is relative in that way. But after a number of years of sort of having this internal conflict about doing it, and like I said, I was scared to death. It was, it's not an easy decision to do that, especially knowing that there's no safety net with it. But eventually I got the courage to do it. And I think if I would have done it at any other point in time, I would not have been successful. I think that I was in the right place at the right time with that decision, and then the universe took care of the rest in terms of making sure that I was okay.
And it's your timing, although some people would say a global pandemic is not the best time to start your own business.
Yes.
The financial side of the federal government's support for companies and the federal and state government support for education has been almost an overwhelming amount of cash.
Yes.
For charter schools. And so I'd imagine that you helped navigate that for your growing client list.
Absolutely, I did. And I'll hone in on another point about what the pandemic, COVID-19, really was a space where I thought a lot of charters would shine because they were tailor-made for that event. meaning that charters have always done things that were outside of the box, outside of the norm of school districts, and the way that we view the traditional educational space. And so I thought that they were the first to easily adapt to the pandemic, at least in my opinion. I could be wrong about that, but from my seat, that's what I saw. That most of my clients were already in that space to go, hey, we can quickly adjust, right? Whereas school districts may have had, they're bigger, so they have more, moving parts. But I thought that the charter space quickly adapted more so to me. And to your point about the funding and things like that, yes, that did open quite a few more doors, in terms of charters now being able to take some of those restricted dollars, those federal dollars, and really put them to work in a unique way. And one of the things, and I'll sort of digress a little bit, because one of the things that COVID, and I said that the timing was perfect for me during 2019, 2020, but in the back of my mind, what was going on was this, hey, I know that there's a way, I have an idea about how I could do this that's a little bit different from the norm of how others were doing it. Because one of the things I told my client was that, I recall during that time, a lot of them would call me and say, hey, what are we going to do? We can't do these things in person. We can't do that. We can't do this. And I go, hey, we're tailor-made for this. We're built for this. You won't miss a beat. Your payroll will run all the same. Your accounts payable will get done in the same manner. We're just going to switch everything to online. Instead of me coming to you, we'll just hop on a Zoom. Because the technology was there. We were not using it or utilizing it in that way. But the amazing thing about human beings is the ability for us to adapt, right? And overcome and change. If we put that in the forefront of our minds. And I think during that time, the charter schools and the charter school movement really did that. There was change, and they were quick to adapt to that change.
It was yesterday when I spoke with Cameron Curry from the Classical Academies, and that's the previous episode. He talked about the fact that I think they gained 1,000 new students in the first couple weeks of the pandemic.
Yes.
And they were uniquely positioned because they were already doing hybrid or distance learning. And so they were able to almost roll forward with very little to no interruption.
Yes.
And so I think that's a real, and he said that local school districts were calling him up and saying, hey, how are you guys still open?
Yeah.
And his response was, well, we're doing the same thing we've always done.
Thank you.
Some of the in-person stuff is going to have to happen less frequently or on a rotating schedule so people aren't in big groups, but all the online infrastructure was already set up.
Yes.
I think in some cases, the bricks and mortar programs, the face-to-face, in-person programs perhaps took a longer time to pivot, but
yes.
To your point about being agile, in a charter community, I think you can move more quickly than you can in a big bureaucracy.
Absolutely.
What's the name of your current company, and how do folks find you?
My company is called North Compass Consulting, and you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can drop me an email at djones@northcompassconsult.com. I'll say something about how I approach clients and that kind of thing, because I have a unique way, and people have told me this is crazy, but I work from a space of building relationships, right? Because I think that's most important in this industry, is to have relationships with the people that you serve. In the same way you have relationships with your parent community at your school, right? I think, on the business end of it, there is it's a business transaction, but there is some amount of, personal interaction that comes with that, because at the end of the day, we're all people. And so my style is, I don't advertise. I don't, I have a website, but I don't even give it out, because you won't really know anything about me and how I work and what I can do for you there. A conversation gets us to that space, right? Getting to know me, getting to know my style, me getting to know you as an individual. You and I go way back, you know, and I think most of that comes through the interactions that we've had one-on-one, right? And the talks we've had, things like that. And so that's my style, and that's how I work. You know, I know folks, everyone has their own way of approaching their business, and I found that has worked for me. You know, to be successful, is, you know, I tend to look more towards developing the relationships with the clients first, because you know, it's one thing for you to hire me to do something for you, but if there's no passion behind it, you know, you're not going to get the best out of me, right? And I'm not going to get the best out of you. So I have to know what moves David. I have to know what his passions are, what gets him out of bed in the morning, right? Things like that. And everyone has that, you know, but do we talk about it? You know, do you share that with others? Because, you know, sometimes, you know, and again, I'm not the guy that's going to dig in your personal life, but at least I need to know, hey, you know, what do you do for fun? You know, how do you go about your day? How do you maneuver? Are you a morning person? Are you an afternoon person? Are you an evening person? Things like that. Because all of those small detail things will make me a better servant to your school. And I like to think of myself in that role as a servant to your school.
It's a little bit like a tailor-made educational program for kids, right?
Absolutely.
If you try to do one size fits all, you're going to miss
Absolutely.
Square pegs and round holes.
And that's always been my, you know, I'll digress a little bit. I'm no educator, but I've always had this sort of feeling about education, and having been in the space for a while and watching educators do their thing and go about educating students. And you know, it's a huge undertaking, but I've always felt that to your point about the one size fits all, I've always had an issue with it in terms of, you know, I know my kids and how they learn, and my daughter learns different from my son and vice versa. And I've always had the thing where, you know, an education should be tailor-made for you, not for all of us, right? You know, and I don't know how you strike that balance. And I know it's a difficult thing. It's easy for me to say that sitting across on the other side of the table, where I don't have to be the guy doing that. But I've always felt like, you know, there should be some amount of uniqueness to that. And I think you would capture the child more. And I'm sure you guys have ways of doing that I have absolutely no idea about, but just food for thought in that way. You know, that's always been a thing that I thought would be unique if we can get there.
We tailor make our music playlists. We tailor make our Starbucks order. We tailor make our sneakers that we buy online. We tailor make our grocery store orders that get delivered to our house, and our Uber Eats and our Uber rides. But this sector, and by that I mean education in general, K-12, has not really evolved appreciably in over 100 years in terms of structure.
I'll agree.
And this is part of that ongoing debate, and so, you know, about, is the true purpose of charter schools as a incubator and a hothouse for innovation still alive 30 years after the passage of the charter school law? We have some examples of real innovation and things that are done so differently that you wouldn't almost recognize it as a traditional school. And then you have, I would argue, many, many, many schools that look pretty similar to what their district counterparts look like.
Yes.
And in fact, we have some districts that are starting to get innovative. And so it's an interesting dynamic there as we roll forward. I had the pleasure of interviewing a San Diego Unified School Board member, Richard Barrera, who's been a board member, I think, since 2009, and we had a long time. We had a good conversation about this very topic, and I asked him about his ideal school in the future, and he talked about, you know, arts and music and having a good deal of choice for folks. It's a tough balance, though, right? We have state standards, we have state requirements, but what they don't do is they don't tell us how to teach things.
Yes.
And so that's where the challenge of staffing our schools with educators who have, for the most part, been educated in a very traditional setting and they went to grad school, and they were taught to teach in a very traditional setting. I had a conversation last night with a teacher who works now with us at Albert Einstein Academies, and she said, I worked for 10 years in a district, and I came to Einstein, and I'm super grateful to be here. I teach exactly the same way at Einstein as I did in the district.
Yeah.
That gave me pause.
Yes.
That gave me pause.
That should have bothered you quite a bit.
It gave me pause. It bothered me, and we had a conversation after, and she was courageous to say that, and I think
Yes.
It's one thing to say you're innovative in name. It's one thing to say you're committed to equity in name. It's one thing to say in your mission and vision you talk about lifelong learners, but what does that really look like?
Yeah.
And can we really define it? And that's a whole different piece.
I got something to say to your point about some of those things, because I'm somewhat the fly on the wall when it comes to the program side of things, right? Because in a back office setting, we deal a lot with the numbers and the compliance and things like that. But boy, do we have a seat at the table when those conversations are going on about how to spend money on particular items and program materials and things like that, curriculum, right? And one of the things that I've always, I shouldn't say it bothers me, but it gives me pause at times, because I think that charter leaders they're the innovative piece of it, the creativity piece of it. I see this space as art, where you're free to create it within certain parameters, right? But you're free to do a lot more than what a district can do, right? And you're smaller, so you don't have the bureaucracy that a district has. But to your point earlier, you made something that I thought was something that I certainly realized, is that a lot of charter schools, you couldn't tell the difference. If you took the name off of it, you couldn't tell if you were in a district school or anywhere else. And to me, that's a slight or disrespect to the movement, because I think the pioneers who came along in 1993 and had the courage to step out there, would look at where we are now and say, boy, I don't think you guys have carried the torch far enough. And that's just my personal critique, because I know there are a lot of innovative leaders within the movement, but I think that there could be more. There could be a lot more. And sometimes I go, I see it and I say, well, you don't have to do it that way. You certainly are free to move about and do things in a way, because at the end of the day, I think parents want the choice to say, yes, my son or daughter has an education program that was almost like tailor-made for them. And I think all charter schools have the ability to do that. My greatest, one of the things I want to see happen is the day when a child individually can wake up in the morning and go, I have a unique lesson plan that's perfect for me, and I can do this whenever I want to. Like, I don't know if you can say 24-hour schools, right? But I know my daughter was not a morning person, dude. We fought every morning.
Nor was mine.
Yeah.
I think she's evolved into it now that she's 20, but yeah.
We fought every morning to get to school on time. And imagine if there's a day when you decide when you learn. I think that would make a better student, right? I'm not the same guy without coffee at, for whatever reason. But I get a cup of coffee, I'm more relaxed, I'm a little bit more pleasurable, I'm a little bit more easy to digest, right? But imagine if I didn't get to have that cup of coffee in the morning and I had to show up and see you or a client. I wouldn't be the same person to a large degree. But I just think that there should be, if I had a critique of educators, I know I'm stepping out on a big limb here and painting with a broad brush, but I would say that more innovation in this arena is a requirement, and it is the task of all educators and of all charter schools to push that envelope. That's what I would say.
I was reflecting on this trip, and so that the listeners understand, we brought 17 of our educators to this charter school conference put on by the California Charter School Association, CCSA, and it's been a wonderful conference so far. We have everybody from administrators to certificated and classified staff. And just looking at, and so last night we went out to dinner as a group. And so just looking at the amount of customization that was required to get 18 people to enjoy their dinner. So we had vegans, we had vegetarians, we had people who had to arrive late because of this reason, that reason. We had 3 or 4 Ubers. We had some people who wanted to walk. We had all these different pieces. Some people wanted to go and be festive after dinner, and other people wanted to go to bed. And so I thought, wow, imagine if we took that same approach in accommodating and meeting the needs of our students every day, rather than say, nope, everybody has to show up and you have to eat and drink exactly the same thing. And if you show up late to dinner, we're going to give you some demerits, penalty, and then you're going to end up in the penalty box and you will get detention, or we're going to call your parents, etc. I could go all the way down the rabbit hole on that. And so we often are very indulgent, and appropriately so, but indulgent and respectful with professionals about their unique needs and wants. And before you go on a trip, you get an email that says, hey, what are your menu preferences? Because we're trying to make reservations. The rhetorical question, though, is why aren't we doing that with kids? Right? They're voiceless. They express their voice in behavior, so it comes out in different ways. But I think largely as a sector, we're not doing that.
Right. And again, as I mentioned before, I'm in spaces with educators quite a bit, and I see how they operate and things like that. And again, that's just my opinion on what I think. I think you have a space to innovate, so damn it, innovate, right? And push the envelope. I would rather the movement crash and burn with pushing the envelope on that creativity, that innovation, and that uniqueness that it has, than to become stagnant or like something else. Right, because I think that's I never like to be comfortable in certain situations, right? Because I think there's a certain amount of, there's something good that comes out of that, right? It forces you to be sharp. It forces you to be on, your game in a certain way. And I always like to see educators in that space and in that way where you're pushing that envelope. Let someone tell you no, or you can't do that, or something. But I think a lot of times I see that people are playing it safe. They don't like the blowback, or they may not like the criticism, things like that. But I totally respect that. I like that innovation. I like the why can't we, right? Because this is how the movement started. Imagine if, in 1993 and 1992, sort of go back to that space, and the first time they heard of, hey, we're going to sort of carve out a unique sector for, a unique educational program, and someone said, nah, we can't do that, Where would we be today? I think, we at least in my opinion, and like I said, my kids are grown now, so I can say this with some amount of confidence that if I had followed the traditional plan, they wouldn't even be where they are today. Because I think the system that we have, saying this from my high horse here, it creates robots and not thinkers, And I think that's what we see in America now. We see robots. We see people who don't think. They don't reason. They just digest whatever is given to them, and there's no questioning of that. And that's the most important thing in education. I think every charter petition has this line in it about creating kids for the 21st century and critical thinkers, yada, yada. The catchphrases. They're all there, right? But how many are really about that mission in a real way? Because that's not an easy task to say, hey, David, I'm going to make you a critical thinker, right? But you're only 12, but how do we do that? And there's a way to do that because kids are curious just by nature, right? But do we stifle that criticism, the curiosity with how we teach them? I'm not the educator here. I don't know that. But I'm in spaces, like I say, where I'm talking about the dollars to be able to do those things. And like I said, my style is this. If you say to me, David is my client, obviously, and for the record, David is not my client, but, if you were my client and you said to me, hey, Delano, I want to do this unique thing, And I say, absolutely, David. Let's find a way to make that happen. Because when you have passion, I have the passion to make it happen, right? So that's where that goes. And to your point, your bigger point earlier about how, the unique space that back office and how they interact, in this area is just that. And again, as I mentioned, not all companies are the same, and the same with schools. Not all schools are the same, but there should be some amount of similarities in that space, especially in education, where, especially in charter world, where this is you don't have a better space to be as creative and innovative as this. You name me that space, and I'll go there. But this is that space for that.
So you spoke about robots,
yeah,
and society in the present day, and I'd imagine that your clients are spread out over various geographical, political areas in California.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd imagine that you're exposed to, or you have a seat at the table, or at least a fly on the wall perspective on different cultures in different communities.
Yes.
And we know during COVID, we saw the culture wars come to the forefront, to mask, to not mask, to vaccinate, to not vaccinate, layered on top of critical race theory.
Yes.
Do we teach it? Do we not? Is it a capital CRT? Is it a small CRT? And on and on and on.
Yeah.
Where do you come down on those types of discussions, and how does your seat at the table become relevant or not? So I guess I should be clear. Would you take a client whose political views on something like critical race theory are so divergent from your own that you feel complicit in something that you don't support?
That's a great question, and I probably would need 1,000 hours to.
I said there'd be no gotchas, but that's kind of a gotcha.
No, it's perfect. I like this question, and I certainly won't shy away from answering it. America is a unique place, and I will start with that. For those who can't see me, I'm a black man, so I won't hide from that, certainly, because that's who I am. I wake up every day as a black man. I live as a black man. And people see me as a black man. It's the first thing you see. I'll digress before I get into that, because sometimes people with the I don't see race. Yes, you do. Yeah. You see me. I see you. Yeah. David, you're a white guy with a bald head and a mustache.
Yeah.
But there's nothing negative about that, right? And I think sometimes we're afraid to say that, right? Because I've had, experiences, even with some of my own clients, where things are said, and I've had to pull people back from the edge and, redirect their thought process or how they look at things. I won't name the authorizer.
There are a lot of authorizers, so I don't think people can guess.
I won't name them, but during the pandemic, I happened to be at a meeting, and there was public comment on CRT. And sometimes in certain spaces, I'm the only black person in the room. And
I'd imagine in a lot of spaces.
A lot of spaces.
In your line of work, right?
A lot of spaces. And the comments were made, and I felt the glance.
Oh, as you were the expert in the room?
Yeah. And I glanced back, and obviously, you have to maintain decorum, and you can't just jump up and say you're crazy, what the hell are you talking about? But there's a lot of misinformation around CRT. And again, I'm no expert in that, right? But I think if you were to ask people to define exactly what it is, I don't think you will get many who can answer that. But I will do my best to kind of shape my perspective of this. And then again, this is just mine in terms of how this plays out. Right. America has a unique history, right? And we can't run from that history. We can't hide from it. But there is a certain acknowledgement that must be made that says, hey, the story or the way that we've told history or spoken of history has excluded a lot of people, right? And we haven't told it from their perspective. And we haven't given them their just due in that history, right? When we, as a child growing up and we learn history in school, world history, U.S. history, et cetera, most of the time it's not about people that look like us, right? Or look like other races, right? And we're only taught certain pieces of history. I mean, slavery lasted 400 years in America, but in high school, I think we spent half an hour, maybe a week, right? That's a class in and of itself, right? And the thing, and again, I can't speak for any other race but my own in the sense that, hey, look, when we talk about critical race theory, anything associated with how we view America, it shouldn't be taken as a slight or from a place of being negative, right? Because the truth is the truth, right? And yes, there was a time in America when, I say a time, it may have been recently as last week or yesterday that, black men would catch hell in certain spaces, right? We just last year or 2 years ago saw a man choked to death on live TV, right? But yet people say, oh, there isn't racism, there isn't police brutality, things like that. And those are uncomfortable conversations, but they must be had. And we will never get past where we are because, I think where we are now is that people are saying, well, and to that thing about the board meeting, I think people are saying, well, don't teach these things to our children. Well, damn it, who in the hell are we going to teach it to? We can't teach it to the adults because I think at some point the adults have, tuned that out, right? But I think it's important from an educational perspective that you create a well-rounded child. And that you must at some point address some of the unsavory parts of American history, right? Yes, they did lynch people. Yes, there is racism in America. It exists in institutions in America to this day. And you can't tell me that it doesn't because, like I said before, I've witnessed it. I've been the victim of it to some degree, right? But for some person to discount that and tell me that it's not, I think it's disingenuous. And then I think when we take it a step further, when we bring, the school board or the elected officials at that level, and we sort of force their hand to say, hey, you can't allow this to happen. And I'll say it. I think it was in Carlsbad. I'm not gonna even sugarcoat it. There was an article they were talking about Carlsbad Unified and their push against.
Oh, was that the school board was weighing in on the curriculum?
The curriculum, right? Yeah, and I'm like, what are you hiding from? Right? Yeah, some of you grandmas were racist. You barred my parents from going to school. That's a real thing. Right?
My dad was
sorry, folks.
Yeah, my dad was born in North Tonawanda, New York, which is outside of Buffalo. And when he passed away, I started to do some research on North Tonawanda because I was going to deliver his eulogy, and I came across this term, sundown city.
Yes, sir.
And this was about 10 years ago, and in full disclosure, I had no idea what that was. So I started. I know. So I started, and actually, there's a recent book that came out that details sundown cities all around America, and North Tonawanda is in there. And actually, when the book came out, if I have the story correctly, it prompted their city council to finally take down the signs that were still up. They didn't. They had they said North Tonawanda is a sundown city. They didn't have on the sign anymore the reason why. But in the old days, probably when my dad was growing up, it said on there, if you're not white,
get the hell out of here.
Get the hell out of here by the time the sun goes down.
Don't let dark catch you around here.
Yeah. So I don't know how. Certainly in upstate New York, you teach local history without including that as a discussion.
I've always wanted to ask the question from the other side of the table, though. because to me, I always say, what is the fear in telling the truth? What is the fear in acknowledging certain behavior? There's no shame in. I mean, it wasn't. None of us per se, did those things. And well, some of us still. People still do those things. To be quite honest, but we're not in that same space anymore. We're not in that same time frame anymore. And in history, you take the good with the bad. Right, but you can't sugarcoat it. You can't dress it up, and put lipstick on it and call it something else. There's certain, as I said before, there's certain places in American history that it makes you cry. To be quite honest with you, and I somewhat pride myself as a student of history, But it was never, because like I said, if I look back on my educational experience from elementary through high school.
You went to school in Long Beach?
No, Los Angeles. I went to Westchester High School. So,
okay.
And as a matter of fact, you talk about sundown town. Right next door to Westchester, there's El Segundo, California. Oh, boy, what a nice place that was in the 1980s. You talk about a sundown town, fact check it if you don't believe me. El Segundo, California. A black man is not welcome there anytime, or was not welcome there anytime, day or night. It wasn't even, I don't even know what you call it. It's not a sunset. It was a sunrise and a sunset.
You get pulled over for,
driving while black is the phrase, right? Yeah. So, but, to that point, and I'm not saying I've experienced any of the racism to the point that people born before me did, right? I think, our parents' generation, things like that, they had a far worse time, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, things like that. But, again, my point with the whole CRT thing is that, hey, look, let's not try to sugarcoat this. Let's approach it. Let's be charter about it, right?
Interesting.
Let's just say what it is for what it is, because it allows because sometimes I think we're afraid of how what we pass to our children, and I think our children are their children are unique in a way that they're able to if you give it to them in the right way, they're able to understand it. Right, and we're not saying that you go top level here, right? You sort of have to. There's a time and a place for everything. And I don't think you change America without changing the young people, right? And I think you guys as educators are in that seat. You guys are the ones who are really the drivers of that change, because when I send my son or daughter, or when I did send my son or daughter to school, I trusted you guys that when they left there, they were going to be better people than when they walked in. When my kids would come home and we would have the real history lessons, we laugh a lot, because especially my daughter, and my daughter was an honor student in history and a couple of other courses, and one of the things that we would joke about was how they would frame certain things, and and even this was critical race theory even back then.
Right.
She's graduated college now, but we even to this day we laugh about certain things, right? One of our running jokes is on Columbus, and the ways that we would sort of joke about that
what discovery means.
Yeah, that relationship, right? And how he's viewed by certain segments of America versus how other segments of America will look at the guy and go, wow, how do you have two opposite ends of the spectrum view on a guy, right? That's because history was written in a different way about the guy, right? I mean, did we tell the truth in that? He raped and pillaged to some degree. He was brave, because I don't know if you and I, David, would have grabbed 3 ships and
I get seasick.
Let's go that way.
There's no part of that.
But enough of my high horse. I think I just fell off of it.
It's interesting reflecting on the fact that so I have great hope in young people.
Mm-hmm.
If you had told me when I was in high school or college that same-sex marriage was going to be largely accepted
Yes.
nationally. Yeah, there's some pockets, but largely accepted nationally and poll where it does. If you had told me that legalizing marijuana would be accepted nationally, blue and red states at the level that it does, I'd say you were crazy.
Me too.
And I believe that it's going to take a generation or two to kind of equalize some of the culture wars extremities, far left, far right, cancel culture,
Yes.
into something that is honest and sensible and balanced, and that where people are not afraid to have tough conversations and realize that we can look at history with a critical eye, whether we make it a capital CRT, sounds like a Michael Jackson song, a capital CRT or not, but to have those honest conversations. A look at history should always be critical, but a look at anything should be critical. So thank you for sharing that and the personal as well. Do you ever turn down potential clients?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I operate from a space of relationships, and with all my clients, there's an interview process, right? The same way that they interview, if you were seeking services, you would go through a process where you would do your thing, right? I don't know if on that list of it is, compatibility, personality-wise, or those kinds of things, right? But I do look for that. And there are times when, I'll be frank, there are times when I know that the way that I work and operate would be in conflict with how another person works and operate, and how we would have synergy, because it's important to have synergy, right? Because to me, that's the sweet spot. That's where the dance happens, right? And, I never want to be in a dance with someone where we're stepping on each other's toes. I'm going left, they're going right. There has to be a beautiful dance. And there's a way that we can get there. And so, yes, I do interview them. I don't think they know I'm interviewing them that way, but just having that conversation, or having conversations, because it gives me a little insight into how they think, into how they work, right? Because, to be quite honest with you, sometimes you guys may not realize this, but from the back office in, we serve many masters in a way, right? We have to please you, make sure you look good, make sure you shine, and you get the right, amount of credit and support that you need. But we also make sure that your board gets what they need as well. And sometimes those things are not necessarily congruent, right? They don't necessarily line up. They're not equal. But we know we work for your board, right? I know that. Your board signs the contract, they approve it, right? But I know that I must have a relationship with David in a way that I can get what I need to get done, and he get what he needs to get done, without us stepping on each other's toes or having a personality conflict, things like that. Because that's when the wheels come off, right? And so it's important for us, in that space as a provider of a service, that we understand the environment, the politics that comes with that. Sometimes there's a civil war going on at the school, and we're the only, we're the only entity that's not involved in that fight. And sometimes that's a unique position to be in, right? Good and bad. But at the end of the day, with all of this, we must make sure that there is some amount of cohesiveness, right? Because this is a unit now, right? We're providing you guys a service that's critical to your operations, right? And you can't have any hiccups in that, right? Because I'll tell you this. I'll give you a classic example. People get paid every month, right? Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different, right? But sometimes things happen, right? Imagine if every month your staff was pissed off at you because their paycheck was incorrect, or it wasn't, what it should, it wasn't timely, etc., right? It's the same way, with our relationship. I have to make sure that I give you what you need, so that way you can give your staff and your team what they need, right? and vice versa. There are times when I need to pull things from you to say, hey, David, I need these things so that way your authorizer can be happy with you. You've turned in all your reports on time, things like that, right? So there's always this ebb and flow with how we go about things. But yes, there have been times when I've thought long, it's crazy to say you pass up money, right?
Right.
Because this is America. You take as much as you can get when you can get it, and even in my world, it's it's not something that comes along every day, right? So when you get a client or you get an offer for a client, you really want to do your best to lock that in. But then there are times, there's an old adage that we use, in dominoes. They say all money isn't good money, right? You don't want to always just score just because you can, right? You have to be strategic about it. And the same with this, because I may take on a client and they're bad for me. Right? And now I'm off my game, and now I'm not balanced in the way that I should be, So yeah, I have passed up clients before just for those reasons.
What would the current age Delano, I'm not going to ask you how old you are, but you're somewhere around my age. So what would the approximately 50-year-old Delano tell the 20-year-old Delano?
That's a great question. Is that the
That's not the real gotcha.
That's not the gotcha.
That's just the reflective middle-aged man question.
Wow. So much. Wow, where do I even start with that, man? I think that was the gotcha question.
As parents, we spend 20 years giving our kids advice.
Yeah.
So now you get to give.
I get to give myself
the young man Delano advice about what's ahead and where to go and where not to go.
I would say this. I would say to my younger self that you're going to be okay. I would say that it's okay to fail. It's okay to try and make mistakes. And trust your judgment. Trust your judgment. That's what I would say to myself.
Thank you for that.
And I was right.
You were right. It's the beauty of hindsight.
Yeah, I was right.
Yeah. So this is a one-word answer.
Yes.
Padres or Dodgers? This is going to determine whether this episode airs. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, it's going to air anyway. Well,
I'm Angels.
I'm a loyalist, and I bleed Dodger blue. I've always bled Dodger blue. There is no other.
I'm sorry about the end of last season.
Yeah, I've been sort of, it's one thing when you start to win,
right,
and you don't finish the job, because I will say that there was a time when I was like, I just want to make the playoffs. I just want to make the playoffs. Yeah. Right? And then you get consistent with that. And now we're winning the division year over year over year. And if you had asked me when we weren't winning, would I have settled for that? I'd be like, absolutely. Every day. I don't care. But, man, there comes a time when you're like, I just want to drink from the cup. I just want to drink champagne. And it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
But we got one.
Yeah.
But then you get greedy because now you want more, right? And now you want to win all the time, right? As opposed to if you'd asked me this 10 years ago, I'd be like, hey, I'll take one and I'll be good for the rest of my life. But now I'm like, hey, this is the year again, right? That kind of thing. So, I bleed Dodger blue, and, there isn't another team.
Well, maybe we need to do another episode in October or early November and see where this season ended up. It's going to be a real dogfight in the NL West. We got
absolutely.
We got Dodgers with almost limitless pockets. We got the Padres now, I think number 3 payroll in baseball, and the Padres are stacked. So if we can avoid the weird freak San Diego accidents and people dropping things on their feet and stuff like that, it's gonna be a season.
Or your future MVP just having steroids in his body, whatever that was.
Hey, that was cream.
Yeah, I don't know what that was.
Ringworm cream.
Yeah. In the DR you can get things in your body without even putting it in your body, man. So it could have been that.
Yeah.
But the Padres scare me because they're the Dodgers' kryptonite, to be quite honest. And I know that, and every time we play them, I cringe. Just, they seem to play their best games when the Dodgers show up. So And to your point, we'll circle back around. Well, maybe before that, because I'd say late September.
Late September. We'll know where it's trending. It was. I attended a couple of the playoff games this past season at Petco Park, and I was amazed by the fact that there weren't that many Dodgers hats. And then I found out that they, hats in the crowd, and then I found out that they actually hacked the ticket system, or they changed the algorithm so that if you were buying from LA it could detect, I don't know what it's called, but it could detect where you were located.
And so probably your IP address or something.
So the people who didn't buy with VPNs, and so they could disguise where they were, they got blocked. It would tell them there's no tickets.
Nice.
So,
I would do that too if I were the Padres. I don't want you Dodger fans coming down here cheering.
I can tell you that for years, and I grew up a Yankees fan, then moved to San Diego 30 years ago, and I've been a Padres fan. So I have suffered.
Yeah,
I've been in the wilderness. I've wandered in the wilderness, and my daughter and I are diehard Padres fans. But we used to go to games, and you go to an LA San Diego game 6, 7, 8 years ago. It was all blue.
Yeah, you thought it was a home game,
and she'd sit there with her fist clenched and go, "Dad, I can't stand it." Yes. I'm like, well, we're not going to pick a fight because although we're on home territory, we're way outnumbered.
You're really away.
Oh man, so. Well, thank you for your time. I got one more question for you before we wrap. So you have the opportunity to design a billboard.
Yes.
And it has to be something that's digestible in 3 or 4 seconds as people drive by on the freeway and look at it. What is Delano Jones's message to the charter sector that will help position them for the next 30 years?
It's a great question. I don't know if I can articulate this in a simple sentence.
It's a billboard.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, I'm sort of prefacing this already with an out. I don't know if you can, if I can, it would probably be an expensive billboard.
Okay.
Is it the
you
one
can have
that
a series of
marquee?
You can have 3 or 4 like they do at the casinos. Like loosest slots, and then the next one.
Exactly.
I'll give you 3 or 4 billboards.
Yeah, maybe it's a series of billboards down the freeway.
That's right.
What I would say is, keep the torch burning. I would probably have just a couple of phrases. Students or children are our greatest assets. Be brave, be courageous, be innovative. I can go down because the one thing about the charter space, David, that I have always appreciated was that it didn't fit anywhere else. It didn't fit within the boundaries of a district model in any way, shape, or form. And I love the fact there's so many opportunities to be innovative. I think that's the word that I would use. Be innovative, right? And don't be afraid to fail, because I like the fact when you guys experiment and you try things, and if it doesn't work out, guess what you do? You go back to the drawing board again.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what I would say. Continue to do those things, and you know your colleagues, you know that arena, and you know what works and doesn't. And yet at the same time, I think I would say, hey, yes, be innovative, because the future needs that. And the children that are coming up now, they're going to need that. They're going to need you guys to lead them in that way, right? Because I think that's how you get those thinkers that we talked about, those critical thinkers. And if we're going to save ourselves as mankind, down the road, if in 30 years we're going to be in our 80s, dude, we're going to be the old geezer. We're going to be the old guys, right? We're the old guys now, to be quite honest.
We are,
right? But when we look back, say 10, 15 years from now, right? Is a table set for that?
Thank you so much for that, Delano. That's a series of billboards, but well worth creating. I really appreciate your time hanging out today, and we'll have to do this again during the MLB playoffs.
Absolutely, man. God bless.
God bless. Thank you for listening to the Superintendent's Hangout. You can follow me on Twitter at DVS1970. Please be sure to share this show with friends and family on social media and in the real world. Thank you to Brad Bacayal for editing and production assistance, and to Tina Royster for scheduling and logistics. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great